Yes, now, member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congressman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell of Florida. The Congresswoman has been calling for a resignation since February and says his mishandling of this case shows, quote, an utter disregard for the law and those he was charged with representing. Congresswoman, so how are your Republican counterparts responding for your call to for Acosta to resign? Will they join you?
I haven't heard any of my colleagues joining me, but as a mother, Mika, it is just atrocious to hear the words of that young woman recall the times when Epstein raped her. This is a criminal who was engaged in sex trafficking, using minors for sexual abuse and assault. And I believe, and I said this back in February, that Secretary Acosta did break the law. This is about justice for the victims. He disregarded the law when he had to consult the victims, when he agreed to a plea bargain deal, and which is why he should resign.
So are you getting any support, at least even behind the scenes, from your Republican counterparts? I mean, I would think that this would be an issue that you can all agree on. What is going on in terms of a total, across the board call for his resignation for the corruption that he has brought to the table here by handling the case the way he did?
You would think that this is the red line where we can come together here in Congress and across America and say that we will not stand for sexual abuse against young girls. I haven't heard anything from my Republican colleagues. That is not to say that they don't agree with me, but I do believe that this is a moment where we have to decide who we are here as Americans and what we're going to stand for, which is why I believe that Secretary Acosta should resign.
Congressman, it's Willie Geist. I want to ask you about a different topic. You invited the Democrats who are running for president next year, including the campaign right now, of course, to the facility in Homestead, Florida, the migrant facility there. What did you want them to see, and what do you believe should be done about what they are seeing down there?
I thought it was important that if they were going to come down to Miami for the presidential debate, that it was important for them to see everything that is happening in Miami-Dade County, which is just 30 miles south of downtown Miami. We have the Homestead Detention Facility. I wanted them to be aware of the fact that we are holding right now 3,000 children in a prison-like facility. We have separated them from their families at the border. They are living in highly regimented prison-like conditions. They have family members here in the United States. Approximately 80% of them do have a family member, and they remain in this for-profit detention facility for more than 40, 50, 60 days. So as they go along the campaign trail, they need to keep in mind what is happening in America today. So I thought it was very important for them to join me, and I was very pleased to see that most of them did come down to the Homestead Detention Facility.
Yeah, they did take you up on that offer. You sent a letter to the Office of Refugee Resettlement sounding the alarm about what's happening at that migrant detention facility in Homestead. Have you heard back?
I have not heard back. I have been asking the same questions now for months since I took office back in January. And I did say that if I did not receive responses to my questions, I will start seeking legal action. They have broken several rules, including the fact of not allowing people like me, a congresswoman, also Senator Harris, Senator Gillibrand, who joined me that Friday, not allowing us entry, although we are allowed by law to go and conduct oversight. So we will see if I receive some of those answers. Very important questions, like, for example, how many kids are they detaining at this moment, right now? How many of those children have family members here in the United States? We'll see if they receive questions.
Congresswoman, you're in the Judiciary Committee. You're in the majority. In the state of Florida, a non-prosecution agreement was proposed and settled on in the Jeffrey Epstein case. There were private lawyers there, but some of the lawyers sitting there were paid by the United States government and worked for the United States Attorney's Office. What are the prospects of having a hearing so that the public can find out what were the details, how were they arrived at, was there any quid pro quo, what happened in that room when the agreement, the non-prosecution agreement, was devised and settled upon?
I think it's important to bring Secretary Acosta and have a hearing. I do know that we have had those discussions here. We will have a meeting later today, which I will bring this up. But the most important thing is that he was the ultimate decision maker. And he knew, as the U.S. attorney, that he had to follow the law and consult with the victims. When I found out in February that he had not done that he did not follow the basic rule of consulting with the victims as he agreed to a plea deal, it showed me that we have no trust in the Secretary of Labor, Secretary Acosta, and that he needs to resign from his post.
So tomorrow, the House Judiciary Committee will vote to authorize subpoenas for 12 of former special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe witnesses. Among the people expected to be called include Jared Kushner, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, former Chief of Staff John Kelly, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, his former deputy Rod Rosenstein, and former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Each of the witnesses gave crucial testimony into Trump's alleged efforts to thwart the investigation. The Judiciary Committee's actions will almost certainly meet resistance from the White House, which has already blocked testimony from other former senior aides. Politico points out that though current and former White House aides are unlikely to comply with the subpoenas, the decision is more complicated for witnesses like Lewandowski, who had no official role with the White House yet remains close to Trump. So, Congressman, what does happen if they defy the subpoenas? We should expect that. Do you guys have a plan?
We will take it to the courts, Mika. This is why I believe that it is so important for us to start an impeachment inquiry. I came out just a few weeks ago after hours of listening to experts and the testimony of prosecutors. We will be voting tomorrow to approve these subpoenas, but not just to look and understand as to what happened during the Trump campaign and after he took office on obstruction of justice charges, but also to talk about the family separation policies, the cruel policies. John Kelly, I have many questions for him. He sits on the board right now of Caliburn, which is a for-profit company that's managing the Homestead Detention Facility. So this is going to be a very important moment for us to start getting to the truth. This is, again, educating the American public, which is so important to question Mueller next week and bring in all other fact witnesses, which are, the people that you just named, Rod Rosenstein, John Kelly, Jared Kushner. After reading that Mueller report, I can assure you that we need to hear from them what exactly happened during the campaign and after President Trump took office.
Congresswoman, has there been enough attention on HHS in terms of their responsibility here? You referenced writing a letter to the office, the ORR, that is in charge of actually supervising these children once they're in this country. My experience was that DHS had a tendency to point to HHS, and HHS had a tendency to point to DHS. This is called the old, it's not my problem, it's theirs. Do you think there's been enough effort to really call the Secretary of HHS in? Because after so many days, as you know, the responsibility for those children shift from the Department of Homeland Security to the Department of Health and Human Services. And Secretary Azar, who runs that agency, I don't think I've seen him sweat enough about their failures of supervising these children, especially those children, as you say, that have family in this country. What is going on in terms of holding HHS accountable?
That's a great point that you bring up, because we actually had a hearing on family separation, and we had CBP, HHS, DHS, and one of the things that I found most troubling is that there's so much incompetence in all of those agencies. Right. The lack of communication, and yes, Secretary Azar it has a lot of arrogance to him. I know that he visited the center actually the Friday that we came with the presidential candidates to visit when we were not allowed in. He was actually in Miami that day, and when you see and hear him in the interview, he thinks everything is going well. He's not answering questions, the same questions I have posed time and time again. I do believe we need to hold him accountable. This is about having children being locked up. We have two crises. We have one in the border, which we've seen these horrific images of children sleeping in concrete, being quarantined because they have a fever, older kids 8, 10 years old taking care of younger kids, not having their basic necessities. And then another crisis in Homestead, which is almost 3,000 kids being locked up so that this company can profit from keeping them inside, away from their families. It is a travesty. And I am here every single day putting pressure on the agencies. Our duty, our job here in Congress is to conduct oversight, and that is exactly what we're doing.
So one more for you. The Trump administration was dealt another blow in its fight to add a citizenship question to next year's census, as a federal judge blocked all but 2 of the Justice Department's 11 ninth-inning legal team substitutions, meaning those lawyers who had reportedly expressed ethical and legal concerns at arguing the case after a Supreme Court swipe will have to continue unless the Justice Department can provide an adequate and specific explanation for their withdrawal. U.S. District Justice Jesse Furman called the request patently deficient and lacking satisfactory reasons. The DOJ's 3-paragraph notification had tried to assure the court that the replacements would not disrupt proceedings, which Judge Furman wrote was not good enough given the court's written argument submission deadline on Friday. The news landed hard at the White House as President Trump on Twitter railed against the, quote, Obama-appointed judge and questioned whether the denial was a first. The Justice Department has the option to resubmit its request to replace attorneys. So, Congresswoman, will House Republicans play any role in this ongoing battle, or is this going to the courts?
I believe that at this moment we are truly entering a constitutional crisis. When you have a president that's disregarding the Supreme Court's ruling, the citizen question should not be on the census. It will undercount very important communities, especially in my area in South Florida. I think that this president disregards the rule of law, and he will probably continue to fight this because this president does not like to lose. But the Supreme Court, as you mentioned, ruled against it. There's not enough evidence as to why the president wants to include this question, except to undercount important communities, communities of color that are affected, particularly in the Florida area, which is where I represent.
All right, Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, thank you very, very much for being on.